Hi everyone, Teddy Baldassarre here, and in this video, I'm going to be reacting to your hot takes for the world of watchmaking. So I asked on Instagram, Twitter, as well as Facebook, what do you guys have a more controversial opinion of in the world of watches? And I wanted to get those together and react to them here today. So we'll go through about 6 or 7 of them and kind of just give my take to your takes. Now, before we jump in, definitely check out some of the new releases on teddybaldassarre.com. Recently, I have new inventory of different Longines models, including the Spirit 37mm, the Zulu Time. These have been a little harder to keep in stock. Really love what these watches are offering from a value perspective, both with true GMT being well positioned at $3,000 with the Zulu Time. And then you have the 37mm Spirit, which is probably maybe the best do-it-all type of watch that you can find. You have the new Wilton GMTs, which I think is the most affordable true GMT on the market currently here in the middle of 2022. Then we also have some new stock and brands that we've launched. We have Louis Erard, really cool independent brand, some eccentric design, and also probably the best way to get into a regulator at a more attainable price. And they have some amazing dials to choose from. And I also know many people love Junghans. One of the main criticisms is the plexiglass crystals. They're now pretty much unveiling many different sapphire options now from the factory that you can just purchase right away. So that is also great to see. So definitely check that out. We'll have links to that in the description. Shop around teddybaldassarre.com. All right, so for our first hot take here, we have the Speedmaster isn't any better than other luxury chronos. It was just involved in something that might have not even happened. So I'm not going to touch that conspiracy theory here. I'm just sticking to the watches here. I don't think we need to address that. But I will say for the Speedmaster, just in the idea of whether or not it's great. So I think on paper, the Speedmaster is absolutely phenomenal. I think it does stack up quite well for price per dollar. I think that's one thing. I will say though, it is more crowded in the range of now luxury chronographs. I mean, I think there are other good options out there, and it's not like it's the most definitive, but go ahead and look at the Submariner. Go look at something like the Daytona. Is it really not well positioned or not as well positioned as some of those other just icons and watches that are out there in the luxury segment? I don't think you can pick on the Speedmaster in that way. And one other thing I will add, your Moonwatch affiliation, I do think though at the end of the day, you can't try to separate and try to remove an object, an artist, or anything from a key attribute or an experience that allowed them to reach that sense of pedigree or sense of achievement just to help fit your narrative. I don't think that works. Imagine if you just would have said, oh, Queen is not as good of a band, and you just erase the idea of the whole Live Aid performance. Is that fair to remove something that was iconic from an affiliation with an artist or a creation like the Speedmaster and trying to diminish the level? At the end of the day, it was the watch that went to the moon. So I don't think we should create alternative scenarios, even if Omega sometimes is maybe promoting something more than they probably should when it comes to that affiliation. For the next point here, we have smartwatches are overrated and they shouldn't exist. I will say this, as enthusiasts, we get very caught up in what we like and we don't like to see the entire world around us. For myself, do not wear a smartwatch. I do tend to like to track my heart rate when I run, so sometimes I might, I've been tempted to actually buy like a Garmin or something of that sort. I know some people are gonna go crazy when they hear this, but there are, I think, tools for the right type of task that sometimes you'll need it. And for certain people, I think a smartwatch might be that tool that they need. So I don't think, I personally don't have a problem with smartwatches. I think they exist in their own lane. I think watches, in terms of a mechanical perspective, the watches that I typically talk about, they're defined on a different level. They're not watches, they're not appealing to the same idea that a piece of tech or a wearable piece of tech is going to appeal to. It's a totally different category. I think since the quartz crisis, when the idea of tracking time was changed based on a mechanical perspective to something that's a little bit more mass market, mass produced, that changed how watches were just going to be viewed by many in the world. And I think since that time, this romantic idea has been the reason why many of these watches ultimately sell. One other thing that I will also say about smartwatches and why I think they should exist is because I think more than what probably many of these Swiss brands will want to admit is one of the best gateways into the world of watchmaking nowadays, I think, is probably some of these smartwatches. Somebody buys a smartwatch, they get maybe a little bit more interested in the idea of wearing something on their wrist, and then they stumble into this beautiful world of wristwatches and getting into mechanical timepieces. I don't think many Swiss brands or any mechanical watch brands are very good at this. I'm like trying to meet that new consumer. It's more of just how do we keep this going? I think us as an industry, we do that sometimes, but I think it'd be very myopic in terms of our approach to just say that smartwatches shouldn't exist. So I disagree. I think smartwatches should exist. And actually, I think net, because of how people look at watches nowadays, at least mechanical wristwatches, I think it probably is going to help the industry from that luxury segment. Our next take here is another unpopular opinion. Quality to cost ratio, JLC has some of the nicest offerings, but is held back solely because they don't appreciate in the gray market. Now, I agree with this partially. I do think from a value to dollar standpoint, JLC is so well positioned. You can get into some reversos, like those starter entry-level reversos, for close to $6,000. And I think that is tremendous value there, as well as even getting something more to the large format, closer in that $7,000 to $10,000 range. Also the Master Collection, fantastic watches. The Polaris is a total slept on model. But I think the main reason, outside of just the appreciating value, and I think actually this is probably the reason why this is the case, is more of just JLC has this timeless nature to many of their designs. They're more dress oriented. They haven't really nailed that perfect modern sports watch. Whether or not they should or not is up for debate. I think the Polaris has way more room to grow in terms of how they're positioning that line in general. But I will say, I think that is the #1 reason why people maybe aren't looking in the same direction. I think value for dollar, totally agree. I think they're so well positioned, but at the end of the day, the design of JLC watches are more oriented to the dress side of things. And if you look at what is hot right now, it's typically not that. So I think it's as simple as that. And of course, I think some of Richemont's management has also allowed some of this to happen. But I think it starts with design and really what is going on with the trends. But if I had to make a prediction, I do think dress watches are going to make a comeback. People are going to become increasingly fatigued in seeing the same sports watches highlighted over and over again. And there's going to be a big gap between those popular watches and maybe some of these dress options. And I think people will wise up and be like, wait, well, why aren't more people looking in this direction? There's some good value here, and I think there's some good lines that are being neglected. Next up, Tyler adds, helium escape valves are unnecessary. There are only a couple of thousand divers in the world who would need one. Saturation diving is a very, very specialized skill, and it borderline cheapens a watch to have one. All it really offers is another hole in the case to fail and let water in. Now, I am not a diver. Someone on our team, Ben Lowry, is a diver, and I have spoken to him about this subject in the past. And even as a commercial diver, the amount of, even amongst professional divers that have to even worry about these deep saturation environments is so small. So I agree with this 100%. So much of the idea around dive watches, water resistance, is so overblown. People have way, way overshot the expectations of what is needed from a water resistant perspective. And also I think brands have gone crazy in the marketing of how much they can withstand. We eat it up at times, but helium escape valve, totally not needed. And also, I don't want to get into it here, but I have a full complete video looking at this very idea of things that you should know about your dive watch. One of them is talking about saturation diving, the pressure as you go underwater, like PSI, and just even at like 100 meters, just the amount of pressure per square inch is crazy. So for 300 meters, I believe it was like 400 something PSI, and you're talking about like refrigerators on every square inch of your watch. So it's so extreme. Nobody reaches those depths. I mean, it's kind of silly. So I totally agree with this, and I would recommend checking out that video if you're just interested in learning more about this subject. Next hot take comes from David. David states, just because you own a Casio doesn't make you not a watch snob. I see a lot of people gatekeeping the hobby by trashing on people's taste in watches. They act like if you don't have a certain type of watch, you aren't a real watch collector / enthusiast. Then they try to convince themselves that they aren't a watch snob by showcasing their affordable watches and singing their praises. So I actually agree with this, and it's kind of funny because this does happen. It's almost like reverse snobbery for what you would maybe naturally assume would be a snob. I don't think it is this socioeconomic or type of idea or status idea. It's more of just an attitude you have for trying to put your own taste on other people and how you are gatekeeping maybe the hobby. If somebody decides to spend their money in a different way than you, I don't think you should necessarily judge them. I think you should just let them, if they're enjoying it, who cares? And they're not bothering you about it. I think a snob, for the most part, is not really about whether it's this idea, I have more money than you. There's certainly some of that. If you have this elitist idea, I hate that. I don't want any part of that, and I don't want to perpetuate that. But also on the flip side, I think there's just become this idea of somebody maybe collects all these watches. They have more money, they're having fun, they're buying different watches. And if they went about their collection differently than you would have, if you were in the same position, it'd make you feel bad about it. I see this quite often actually. And they're saying like, oh, this is just another collector who just buys things, you know, which they don't even know. They just see their collection and think that tells the whole story about who they are. So I do believe there is a lot of truth to this. And at the end of the day, I think a snob is somebody who basically just puts their own opinions, thoughts onto somebody else and kind of ridicules them for it. At the end of the day, if they're not bothering you, they're having fun with what they're doing, no harm done for me. Now for our last hot take, we have more watches need rotating timer bezels, but without the dive aesthetic. You don't need to be a diver to want to time things, and not everyone can afford a chronograph. I just simply agree. I would say this is more of a lukewarm take here. I don't know if it's really a hot take, but just in general, not falling into the habit of just because something has been done before, let's just always do that, or trying to think about being a little bit different in terms of the design. One thing that I really like is a countdown bezel. Zinn with the 104 is a great example of this. I remember when I had one of these, if I was in a meeting and I had to time something or I had to return in 30 minutes, it just felt more natural to see that type of display, or just the way that the bezel is designed. Even if you have an elapsed time bezel, just showcasing it in a different way. Typically what you'll find is there's gonna be a lot of hash marks at the 0 to 15 minute mark to really kind of pinpoint those specific points of time. But I don't necessarily see why that always needs to be the case. I think brands could get a bit more experimentative in terms of how they're approaching their bezels. And I think something like a countdown, seeing that more often, it's kind of strange you don't see it as often as you do. That would be great to see. But all right, guys, that is my takes to your takes. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Really would appreciate that. Also, if you want to stay in the loop of when I do these in the future, sure to follow on Instagram. You can follow on Facebook as well as on Twitter. Post on some cool photos there, which I'm surprised people really like the Twitter photos, which is kind of cool because it seems like they don't compress them the same way as Instagram. So you kind of get the more full effect of the quality of the photos that we're taking. So pretty cool to follow there as well. Definitely check out TeddyBaldassarre.com, full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the new products that we offer. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.